Hey everyone, it's Dr. Nightstare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. The chipped ceramic plate sat before me with a slice of cake. 10 years. The number felt like a heavy weight in my chest. David sat across the small table, his eyes fixed on the television screen. He had not looked at me all night. He did not acknowledge the date. He did not care about the cake. He did not care about me. His indifference was a cold, constant presence, a familiar chill that had settled deep in my bones over the years. My stomach tightened, a hard knot of despair forming inside me. I picked up the fork, but the cake tasted like ash in my mouth. My vision blurred. A decade of my life had vanished into this apartment, into this stagnant existence. I felt completely invisible. I felt completely alone. The suffocating air pressed against me, squeezing the last remnants of hope from my lungs. I needed to breathe. I needed to move. A sudden, desperate impulse seized me. My hands trembled. I pushed the plate away with a scraping sound that David ignored. I stood up from the table. My legs felt shaky but propelled me forward. I walked to the bedroom and pulled the old duffel bag from under the bed. My movements were quick, driven by an urgent need. I shoved a few clothes inside. I grabbed my worn purse. I did not know where I was going. I only knew I could not stay here another minute. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked out of the bedroom and past David, still staring at the screen. I did not look at him. I opened the apartment door and stepped into the hallway without a backward glance. I did not stop walking. I did not stop walking. The city gave way to industrial roads, then to the dark expanse of trees bordering the highway. My legs ached and my lungs burned with every breath. I stumbled into the tree line, seeking the deeper cover the woods offered. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and disorienting. But I pushed forward, away from everything I knew. My feet crunched on fallen leaves and twigs, each sound amplified in the heavy quiet. I walked for what felt like hours, my body driven only by the desperate need to escape. Then, through the dense foliage, a soft, inviting light appeared. It was a small structure, a cabin, tucked away from any road. A warm glow emanated from its windows, beckoning me closer. I approached the wooden door and knocked, my knuckles feeling raw against the solid surface. The door opened slowly. An elderly woman stood there, her face lined with age, her eyes kind and curious. A gentle smile touched her lips as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Child, you look lost," she said, her voice soft and welcoming. "Come in, out of the cold." I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and old books, a comforting warmth enveloping me. She led me to a worn armchair by a stone fireplace. The crackling fire cast dancing shadows across the room. She brought me a mug of hot tea. I held the warm cup in my trembling hands and felt tears well in my eyes. She sat opposite me, her gaze steady and patient. I found myself speaking, the words tumbling out in a rush, a decade of loneliness and pain finally voiced. I told her about David, about the emptiness, about the 10 years that had become a cage. She listened, never interrupting, only nodding softly sometimes. When I finished, the woman, Irene, reached out and gently squeezed my hand. "You need a place," she said simply. "A place to heal. This cabin is my home, but I am moving to assisted living next week. It will be empty." She looked around the cozy room. "It needs someone. It needs life. You can stay here, dear." My mind reeled. A chance. A real, solid chance at freedom. The offer was immediate and unexpected, a clear path forward where before there had only been endless darkness. I looked at Irene, then around the comforting cabin. This was it. This was my escape. I made my decision with a resolute nod. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I will stay." I knew then, with every fiber of my being, that I would never go back to David, not ever again. Irene waved from the porch, her small car disappearing down the dirt road. The cabin felt quiet after she left, a peaceful quiet that was new to me. I walked through the rooms, touching the rough wooden walls, the smooth, polished furniture. The scent of pine and old wood filled the air, a constant, grounding presence. I settled into the large armchair by the fireplace, the dying embers casting a gentle orange glow. Later that night, as I lay in the soft bed upstairs, a distinct thud came from what sounded like the attic directly above my head. I sat up quickly, my heart beating fast against my ribs. I listened intently, straining to hear anything else, but only the gentle crackle of the last logs in the fireplace downstairs broke the quiet. I told myself it was just the old house settling, a natural creak of timber in the night. I pulled the quilt higher around my chin and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea. I had left the wooden spoon on the counter after stirring my sugar, but now it rested neatly on the hearth by the fireplace. I knew I had not put it there. A small ceramic bird on the mantelpiece had also shifted slightly, now facing the window instead of the room. I walked over and gently turned it back. It was peculiar, a series of small, strange occurrences. I found myself looking around the room, a strange feeling blooming in my chest. A gentle warmth sometimes settled around me as I moved through the rooms, like a soft cloak draped over my shoulders. I felt a presence, not an intrusive one, but one that simply observed. It felt like a watchful eye, a tender embrace, always near. The cabin was alive in a way I had never known a place to be. It did not make me feel alone anymore. Instead, it felt like a comforting companion, a gentle guardian that had taken me under its protection. I knew I was safe within these walls. I knew I was not truly alone. I sat by the window, watching the rain fall in steady sheets against the glass. A cup of warm tea rested in my hands. The cabin felt quiet and safe around me, its old timbers settling with a gentle, reassuring rhythm. I traced the intricate carvings on the mantelpiece with my finger, lingering on the large wooden bear that dominated the space above the fireplace. It stood on its hind legs, its paws raised, a powerful and watchful figure. I felt a sense of calm. The strange happenings of the past days had become part of the cabin's comforting personality. A sudden, sharp gravel crunch broke the peaceful afternoon. It came from the dirt path leading to the cabin. My stomach clenched instantly. No one knew I was here. My heart began to pound a frantic, sickening beat against my ribs. A moment later, a loud, aggressive knocking shook the front door. The sound echoed through the small space. "Open the door." A voice, harsh and raw with anger, ripped through the air. "David." My breath hitched sharply in my throat. I stood frozen, my tea forgotten on the sill. He found me. He had actually found me. Another violent series of knocks rattled the old wood. "I know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it has to be." His voice rose, laced with a terrifying edge. I backed away from the window slowly, my eyes wide with sudden terror. There was no escape. The cabin felt small around me, the walls closing in. The protective warmth I had grown to expect from the cabin was there, but now it felt agitated. It vibrated with an urgent, dangerous energy. The very air around me began to crackle. He started kicking the door with furious, heavy blows. The old wood groaned deeply under the relentless assault. Splinters flew into the room with each impact. I could hear the frame beginning to crack. My eyes darted to the mantelpiece. The carved wooden bear seemed to grow larger, its dark eyes fixed on the struggling door. A deep rumble began to reverberate through the floorboards. It was not a sound from outside. It came from within the cabin itself. The bear's carved fur seemed to ripple. Its wooden muscles flexed. With a final shattering kick, David broke the lock. The door splintered inward, hanging precariously from one hinge. He stood framed in the opening, a dark, menacing silhouette against the gray rain outside. His eyes scanned the room, finding me. A cruel smile spread across his face. He took a step into the cabin, but he did not get another. The wooden bear exploded from the mantelpiece with a deafening roar. It was no longer wood. It was flesh and fur, muscle and claw, immense and terrifying. It lunged across the room, its massive body tearing through the broken doorway. David gasped and stumbled backward. The bear's powerful paw swiped through the air, seizing him by the shoulder with shocking force. His scream was sharp and brief. The bear did not hesitate. It turned and dragged him from the cabin, effortlessly pulling his struggling form into the swirling rain and the dense darkness of the forest. I heard his muffled cries, then a desperate gurgling sound. The sounds faded quickly into the background of the pelting rain, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the heavy tread of something enormous moving through the undergrowth. Then there was only the sound of the rain. The broken door hung open, letting in the cold, wet air. I stood shaking, clutching my arms tightly, staring out into the empty, rain-swept woods. I stood shaking, clutching my arms tightly, staring out into the empty, rain-swept woods. Cold, damp air rushed in through the broken doorway. A soft clink came from the kitchen. I turned slowly. On the wooden table, a cup of tea sat ready, a saucer beneath it. I had not made tea. I walked to the table and picked up the warm mug. The scent of bergamot rose to my nose. It was exactly what I needed. I took a sip. A wave of calm washed over me, a feeling of deep peace settling into my heart. The lingering terror began to recede. The rain outside seemed to soften its beat against the windows. The cabin truly felt like a living entity. I remembered Irene's words. I am moving to assisted living next week. She had looked at me with knowing eyes. Her smile was serene. A sudden, clear understanding settled in my mind. She had not been preparing for a physical move. She had already passed on, a spirit waiting to guard this place. She had been here all along. She was a part of the cabin's gentle watch. A soft shimmer appeared near the splintered door. Two forms began to solidify, translucent and softly glowing. It was Irene, her kind face calm, and beside her stood an older man with a quiet smile, a man I had never met in the living world. He looked like her. They both looked at the broken door. With a shared glance, they reached out their hands. Their fingers passed through the wood, but the splintered edges began to knit together, slowly, perfectly. The jagged cracks disappeared. The broken lock reformed itself, becoming whole once more. The door became solid and strong, as if it had never been touched. Irene turned her translucent gaze to me. "You are safe here." Her soft voice, a whisper on the air, resonated within me. "Always." The man next to her nodded, his smile warm and reassuring. I understood everything. This cabin was not just a home. It was a place guarded by deep affection, a haven watched over by kind spirits. I was truly safe. My body knew how to grow babies, welcoming life with an easy rhythm. Frida came first, a gentle presence from the moment I felt her move, and her birth was quick, almost effortless. Holding her small body close for the first time filled me with a completeness I had never imagined possible. Then Harry arrived, a whirlwind of energy even before he left my womb. a spirited child whose cries tested my patience through many sleepless nights. Yet cradling him against my chest brought a fierce, instinctual protectiveness that grounded me. Poppy completed our family, a calm child who smiled readily. Her bright eyes made our home feel warm. Each pregnancy had unfolded with perfect rhythm. Each birth affirmed my mothering heart. I loved my 3 children, Frida, Harry, and Poppy, with a love that felt limitless. Watching them grow, seeing their unique spirits thrive, made my world feel perfect and whole. I knew then that my family was complete. My heart understood there would be no more children, for I had everything I desired. My certainty shattered when I knew a 4th child was growing inside me. The dread of Alex arriving felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, a constant, suffocating pressure that tightened my throat. My body still worked with its accustomed rhythm, growing life with effortless ease, but my mind raged against it, a storm of unwanted thoughts and desperate fears that clawed at my composure. The pains started suddenly, just like before, and Alex came into the world quickly, a rush of warmth and fluids that my body delivered without effort or protest. The nurse placed the baby in my arms, a tiny, squalling infant, but I recoiled immediately, pushing the bundle away with a force I did not know I possessed. The room began to sway around me, the bright lights above blurring into an indistinct haze, and the walls seemed to melt and run together. The sound of the baby's cries twisted into sharp, discordant notes, then fractured into a cacophony of meaningless noise that clawed at my brain. My own skin felt strange and disconnected from my bones, and I could no longer tell where my body ended and the air began. Everything spun faster, pulling me into a void, and the world dissolved into pure, formless darkness. I opened my eyes to harsh fluorescent light and the stark white of a hospital ceiling. My body felt distant, a heavy weight I could not command. I tried to move my fingers, to shift my head, but nothing responded. Only my eyes moved, darting around the small room. Then I saw him, Michael, sitting beside my bed. His face showed the passage of 11 years. He looked older and tired, almost a stranger, but his hand reached for mine. His touch felt alien, yet offered some comfort, I remembered. He spoke my name, his voice thick with a grief I did not yet understand. "You're awake," he breathed. His words held relief. A deep sadness accompanied them. 11 years, he whispered. The number hung in the air, a cruel, impossible truth. My mind struggled to grasp this. 11 years? Where were my children? Frida, Harry, Poppy, Alex? I tried to ask, but my throat was dry, my voice locked away. Michael looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "The doctors say it was a neurological event," he explained. His words were careful and deliberate. "You never woke up after the incident." A dread began to coil in my stomach. "The children," I managed to croak, a raw, broken sound. He closed his eyes, then opened them again, gazing at me with desperate tenderness. "They're not real, Sarah," he said, his voice barely audible. "None of them." The words struck me. My memories broke apart. He explained more, a horrific confession pouring from him. "When you fell into the coma, the doctors said there was no hope for you. I wanted a family. I wanted your children." He swallowed hard. His face showed regret and anguish. "I used your frozen eggs. IVF. Your body was stable enough for the pregnancies. It was me, Sarah," I decided. My mind reeled. I tried to reconcile the vivid life I had lived, the pains, the births, the children I held, with this monstrous confession. My pregnancies were not real. My children were not mine. They were strangers, grown in my unconscious body, conceived by a decision I never made. The joy, the struggle, the fierce love, all of it was a lie, a result of my damaged brain. My babies, my Frida, Harry, Poppy, and Alex were ghosts. They were products of a stolen autonomy, a mother's greatest loss. This was a waking nightmare. You need to understand this now. I am being hunted, and there is no escape for me. I feel its presence everywhere, a constant pressure just beyond my sight. Each shadow holds a threat, and every unexpected sound makes my heart leap into my throat. It has found me, it will not stop. I know this with a certainty that chills me to my bones. This fear is a cold truth that settles deep inside me, a truth I cannot shake away. I cannot outrun it. I cannot hide from it. It always knows where I am. My time is running out, and this story is about the end, not survival. It began with small signs, then it became a shadow, then a presence. Now it is a certainty. The morning bus followed its usual winding path through the city streets. I watched buildings and people pass, a familiar blur of the everyday. The seats around me filled with other commuters lost in their routines. Then I saw him sitting across the aisle. His clothes were dark and worn, with cuffs and collar frayed. His face had many deep lines, and his skin had a gray color. His hair was sparse and stringy. What stopped me was his gaze. His eyes were wide open and fixed on my face. He did not blink. They held an intense, unwavering focus, a singular attention meant only for me. I tried to look away, turning my head toward the window, but I felt his stare pressing down on me. It pulled my attention back to him. He did not move. He did not shift his focus. The other passengers talked or looked at their phones, unaware of the disturbing confrontation happening a few feet away. His unblinking eyes seemed to penetrate me, removing the comfort of the routine journey. A cold chill spread through me despite the warmth inside the bus cabin. His gaze felt relentless and intrusive, a silent violation of my personal space. My heart started to beat faster, panic growing in my chest. He watched me until my stop arrived. Every moment felt extended, his presence inescapable. I moved past the other passengers and exited the bus, stepping onto the sidewalk. The brisk morning air outside felt cold and thin, offering no relief. The memory of his intense, fixed stare lingered, leaving a deep disturbance in the ordinary morning. My shift at the grocery store was nearing its end. I scanned items across the counter. The fluorescent lights made a drone above me. A long line of customers stretched back through the aisles. My mind drifted, trying to shake the memory of the man on the bus. Then I saw him again at the front of the queue. His clothes were the same dark, worn fabric, the cuffs frayed. His face had deep lines and a gray pallor. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on me with that stare that was familiar and intense. My breath caught in my throat. He stepped forward, ignoring the other customers. He leaned over the counter, his voice a sound that was low and raspy and carried through the store. "There you are," he said. His words were clear and unwavering. "I knew I would find you eventually. All this time, all this searching, you cannot hide from me anymore." My hands trembled, fumbling with a jar of pickles. The other customers paused. Their conversations stopped. Their eyes turned to us, a growing circle of faces. A young woman dropped her basket. Oranges rolled across the floor, making soft thuds. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. His gaze pierced through me, stripping away any sense of normalcy. "It has been a long hunt," he continued. His voice rose slightly, a rough quality entering his tone. "But I always find what I am looking for. Always. You belong to me now." A woman near the front of the line made a gasp. A man behind her muttered about security. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor. The checkout line, usually a place of transactions, became an exposed stage. I could not move. I could not run. I was trapped behind the counter, my terror on full display for everyone to see. The silence in the store grew tighter. His words echoed, each one shattering my sense of safety. He watched me. His smile was triumphant and terrible, slowly spreading across his lips. It was a smile of possession. He held my gaze for another long moment. No one moved. No one spoke. The air thickened with unspoken alarm. Then, slowly, he straightened up. He turned from the counter and walked away, not looking back. He melted into the aisles at the back of the store, leaving me frozen. The world outside the encounter faded. There was only him, his accusations, and the inescapable truth that he had found me. The fear settled deep, a heavy weight in my chest. The encounter at the store left me shaken and cold. I stumbled home, my hands fumbling with the keys. Every lock clicked into place. I checked the windows, pulling down the blinds and latching each one. The world outside felt distant, yet his image burned in my mind. The phrase, "You belong to me now," echoed in my ears. I walked through my apartment, a desperate need for safety pressing down on me. I wanted to believe I was secure, that four walls and locked doors could keep him out. The darkness in my home offered no comfort. It felt like a cover for something waiting. I sat on my couch, my breathing shallow and fast. Sleep would not come. Every creak of the building, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like footsteps approaching. My nerves were stretched tight. I kept seeing his unblinking eyes, his terrible smile. The air in my apartment grew cold, a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Then I heard it. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing, seemed to drift from the bedroom. My heart stopped. It was not a sound from outside. It was a voice, a dry, raspy voice. It said my name. I froze on the couch, unable to move. A new kind of terror took hold, far worse than the fear on the bus or in the store. This was my home, my private space. I stood slowly, my legs feeling weak. I walked to the bedroom door, each step a struggle. The darkness inside the room seemed deeper than before. Then the whisper came again, clear now, from the corner by my bed. "You belong to me now." The words filled the room. The same voice I heard at the checkout. He was here. He had been waiting. There was no escape. My mother gave me the box of summer school books, telling me Mr. Davies expected them delivered to Ethan Wilder before noon. Mr. Davies was my English teacher. He had called our house directly, knowing I lived only a few blocks from Ethan. My mother always said yes to teachers. Ethan Wilder was known around town. He lived in the isolated house on the edge of the woods, and everyone called him eccentric. I did not want to go. The sun beat down, turning the box hot in my hands. The walk felt long. I hated summer school and resented carrying evidence of it to anyone, especially Ethan. I reached his porch. The paint on the house peeled in long strips. Weeds grew tall and tangled in the flower beds. I knocked on the door, then knocked again. The door creaked open. Ethan stood there, gaunt. His pale face had sunken eyes. A wide strip of gray duct tape covered his mouth. His hair was long and matted. He wore dirty jeans and a torn shirt. My hand tightened on the box. He stared at me for a moment. Then his eyes darted to the books in my hands. He extended a bony hand and gripped my arm. His fingers felt cold. He pulled me into the house. I stumbled forward, dropping the books onto a worn rug. The door shut behind me with a solid thud. A terrible smell hit me. It was the smell of something rotten, something dead, and something else I could not place. The air felt thick and heavy. Ethan still gripped my arm, his eyes wide and fixed on my face. He tugged me deeper into the house, away from the doorway. My mind raced with confusion and alarm. Ethan pulled me forward, away from the doorway and into a large living room. My eyes instantly fixed on the walls, and a new wave of horror washed over me. Every surface was covered in scarlet markings, stretching from the floorboards to the ceiling, a disturbing tapestry of dark red characters. They were not letters from any language I had ever seen. The symbols twisted upon the plaster, and they shifted their forms with a slow, deliberate motion as my gaze moved across them. The intricate lines and jagged edges seemed to pulse with a horrifying vitality. My vision blurred around the edges, then sharpened with an unnatural intensity, locking on to the overwhelming pattern. A strange, almost physical pressure began to build inside my head. These characters, etched in stark red, coiled and untwisted before my eyes, creating a disorienting effect that made the room feel as if it were breathing around me. The air grew heavier, pressing in, and the smell of decay intensified, but now it carried an additional metallic tang, like old, dried blood. A powerful confusion filled my mind, scrambling my thoughts. I tried to make sense of the markings, but their forms defied understanding, slipping away the moment I thought I had grasped them. A deep dread rooted itself in my chest, a cold, sickening fear that vibrated through my bones, but an equally strong, insistent fascination rose to meet it. It was a bizarre, terrifying allure, drawing me closer to the walls, compelling my attention in a way nothing had ever done before. I felt a terrible pull towards the scarlet symbols. My muscles tightened, and my fingers curled into a fist, then opened, trembling slightly. An overwhelming, frightening urge began to bloom within me. I needed to trace those lines. I needed to scratch those very shapes onto something. I felt a desperate, growing need to replicate them, to make them myself, to see them appear under my own hand. The thought was repulsive, yet undeniably powerful, buzzing beneath my skin like a swarm of angry insects. It was not a thought I chose. It was a command the walls had placed within me. Ethan released my arm. He gestured vaguely at the walls with one bony hand, his eyes wide and fixed on the scarlet script. His voice came out as a rasp, dry and cracked from disuse or perhaps from something worse. "Parents," he said, the sound barely a whisper. "They made a mess." He shook his head slowly, and his gaze lingered on a particular section of the wall, one dense with interlocking, jagged shapes, as if he understood the language of those horrifying words. The terrible urge to carve those very shapes into something still gripped me tightly. Ethan released my arm. He gestured at the walls with one bony hand, his eyes wide and fixed on the scarlet script. His voice was a dry, cracked rasp. "Parents," he said, barely a whisper. "They made a mess." His gaze lingered on a wall section dense with interlocking, jagged shapes. The terrible urge to carve those shapes still gripped me. Ethan turned and walked towards a dark hallway. I followed him. The smell intensified with every step, a cloying sweetness mixed with the rot. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. The words on the living room walls pressed in behind me, their silent commands echoing. Ethan opened a door at the hall's end. He stepped through. I hesitated, then followed him into the room. This was the kitchen. Counters were covered in dried, dark stains. A whiteboard leaned against the far wall. It was covered in Ethan's cramped, frantic writing. I saw phrases like, "Lula is good, the walls need more. It's the sickness, and Lula wants new words." Other words were scratched out, smeared or overlapped. The board was a chaotic record. Ethan pointed to the whiteboard with a finger stained dark red, then motioned towards the stairs. He was eager for me to see something else. I climbed the steps behind him. The thick carpet muted my footfalls. Each step felt heavy. My stomach churned with a growing dread. The upstairs hall was dark. The air here was heavier, saturated with metallic, sweet odor. The words reappeared on these walls. Here, They were not just carved into plaster. Outlines were scratched directly into wallpaper. Some sections peeled back, revealing words scored deeply into bare drywall. The scarlet lines glowed in the dim light. Ethan stopped at the first door and pushed it open. I looked inside. 2 figures lay on the floor. They were naked. Their bodies were slender, covered in the scarlet words. The words were carved into their skin, a network of shallow, bleeding lines that covered their chests, arms, and legs. Their faces were contorted, their eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. One was Ethan's mother, pale hair recognizable. The other was his father. Sticky, dark red blood seeped from cuts, forming small puddles on the worn rug. Their hands covered in carved symbols, each hand raised towards the adjacent wall. Their fingers were stained crimson. I saw tools lying on the floor beside them. An old carving knife, a broken ceramic shard, a rusty screwdriver. The walls surrounding them were dense with scarlet. The words here were dense, intricate, and deep. The parents had cut themselves, then pressed their bloody bodies against the plaster, transferring carvings from their skin directly onto the walls. This scene was a ritual, a grotesque act of self-mutilation and inscription. Ethan pulled my arm, urging me onward. He led me past the parents' room to another door at the hall's end. This door was smaller, painted a faded pastel yellow. My heart pounded. He opened it slowly, revealing a small room. This was a nursery. A broken crib stood in the corner, its bars splintered. The rocking horse lay on its side, one eye missing. The wallpaper here was covered in scarlet words. They were smaller, delicate, weaving around cartoon animals that had been part of a cheerful border. A small, folded blanket lay on the floor in the room's center. It was stained with dark red, the same color as the words. Ethan knelt and picked it up. He held it out to me. The blanket was soft yellow flannel, covered in more carved symbols. Crude symbols marked it. "Baby Lula," Ethan whispered, his voice cracked. "She had the sickness first." He dropped the blanket. It landed on the floor. The scarlet words on its fabric twitched in the oppressive air. The nursery walls pressed in, making the room feel small and wrong. The terrible urge within me to carve those shapes, to become part of the writing, had grown stronger. Luke staggered back from the blanket, away from Ethan and the overwhelming presence of Lula's words. The need to escape was an all-consuming fire in his gut. He turned blindly, shoving past Ethan, who stood motionless by the crib, his eyes still fixed on the floor. Luke stumbled out of the nursery and down the dark hallway, past the open door of the parents' room where the carved bodies lay. The metallic scent of blood clawed at his throat, and the scarlet words on the walls seemed to writhe, eager to pull him back. He pounded down the stairs, ignoring the twisting walls of the living room, the grotesque script pulsing and twisting. He fumbled with the front door latch, his hands trembling, the metal cold and unresponsive for a terrifying second, and then it yielded. He yanked the door open and burst outside, gasping for air that felt thin and clean after the suffocating stench within. He ran. He did not look back at the peeling house, at the tangled weeds, or at the dark doorway. He just ran down the cracked pavement, his lungs burning, his legs pushing him further and further away from the nightmare behind him. He ran all the way home, past his own porch, and straight into his bathroom. He ripped off his clothes, letting them fall in a heap, and stepped into the shower, turning the water on full blast. He scrubbed at his skin until it was red and raw, trying to wash away the cloying smell, the feel of the words, the memory of what he had seen. When he finally stepped out, dripping wet and shivering, he wrapped a towel around his waist. He looked at his arm, expecting to see only soap and water. But then he saw it. A distinct scarlet word was carved into the flesh of his left forearm. It was small, no larger than his thumb. The lines were thin, precise, and still fresh, not yet scabbed over. It was an impossible mark. He traced the symbol with a trembling finger. The skin around it felt hot and alive. It was one of Ethan's words, an incomprehensible glyph, now etched into his own body. The immediate terror of the house receded, but the word on his arm remained, a constant, burning reminder. He tried to ignore it, to forget, but the symbols on the wilder walls had done their work. The urgent need to replicate them, which had pulsed beneath his skin in Ethan's living room, began to return. It started subtly, a vague unease, a flickering image behind his eyes. Soon it grew into an irresistible craving, a physical ache that throbbed in his bones. He saw the patterns everywhere, in the cracks of the ceiling, in the grain of the wooden floorboards, in the tangled shapes of his own bed sheets. Each pattern was a whisper, a silent invitation to pick up a tool, any tool, and carve. He fought it. He squeezed his eyes shut and gripped his hands until his knuckles were white, but the compulsion was a living thing inside him, growing stronger with every passing minute. His own home, once a place of safety, began to twist. The familiar walls of his bedroom seemed to shift, imperceptibly at first, then with more certainty. He noticed a new door, small and dark, appearing in the corner of his closet, where there had only been a plain wall before. He knew it was a new structure. Then another, this one a pale yellow, appeared opposite his desk, its surface smooth and unblemished, yet inexplicable. These doors were silent, closed, and utterly wrong. He walked past them, touching their smooth surfaces, feeling a strange resonance, a connection to the horror he had witnessed. He knew, with a terrible certainty, that they led nowhere good. The house was changing. His mind was changing. The words had taken root, and now they were growing. He felt the cold touch of a carving tool in his mind, and a familiar, faint scent of old blood began to drift through his own once clean air. He lifted his marked arm, looking at the symbol that now defined him. The wall sickness had spread. It lived within him now, urging him to write. The morning sun warmed my face inside the tent. I heard students laughing near the lake. Birds chirped in the surrounding pine trees. Our school trip felt peaceful. A soft breeze rustled the leaves above me. I started to pack my bag. Then a guttural roar tore through the air outside. The ground vibrated with heavy thuds. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. A massive shadow fell across the tent flap. A terrible growl ripped through the fabric, followed by the sound of tearing canvas. Something large tore at the tent beside mine. Screams erupted. I saw a flash of brown fur and sharp claws. Panic seized me. I scrambled for the other side of my tent, needing to escape the chaos. My legs pumped hard, away from the shrieks and growls. Trees blurred past. I stumbled over roots, my lungs burning with each breath. The dense woods thinned, revealing an old house, dark and silent with gaping windows. I ran toward it, needing refuge from the animal. I pushed open the warped wooden door. It groaned on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was cold and musty. Dust lay thick. Dark red shapes covered the walls, geometric lines and sharp angles forming patterns. A strange altar stood in the center, adorned with symbols, dried flowers, and bones. A rustle came from the far corner. I spun, my heart hammering. A tall form stood there, completely still, made of bleached bones. No skin or muscle covered its frame, only bone. Deep hollows marked its eye sockets. It moved then, stepping into light from a broken window. It advanced. Its bones clicked as it moved, not with steps but a continuous flow across the floor. This was no animal, but an impossible hunter. The cold in the room deepened around me. The creature's bony fingers clamped around my arm. Its grip felt cold and powerful, and I could not break free. It dragged me across the floor toward the strange altar. My feet scraped over rough wood. I thrashed and screamed, but no sound came out. My throat burned. The skeletal being lifted me onto the altar, its eye sockets fixed on mine. There was no light within them, only darkness. It placed a jagged bone shard on my chest. Its touch was burning cold. It started to carve symbols into my skin with the bone shard. Pain seared through my arm as the sharp edge cut deep. I could not scream. It was not just physical agony. A cold dread seeped into my mind, something wrong and alien twisting my thoughts. Its movements were precise and deliberate. It carved a complex pattern on my forearm, a series of connected lines and strange curves. My blood welled up, tracing the new marks. It pressed its bony hand onto the bleeding design, pushing down hard. A terrible burning cold infused the wound, as if my very essence was being stitched into the pattern. This was not an attack. This felt like a grotesque offering, a twisted attempt to make me part of its realm, to bind me to its purpose through this violence. My mind fractured, unable to process the utter violation. The mark glowed briefly, then faded into a permanent scar. The feeling of utter violation remained, twisting my perception of reality. I lay there, irrevocably changed, my trauma, a persistent, incomprehensible presence. I survived the woods. The mark on my arm, the world outside felt sharp and wrong. Sleep brought no rest, only fractured images of bone and shadow. I saw the skeletal form everywhere, in the corner of my eye, just beyond the reach of light. Each passing day brought a slow, deliberate tightening around my chest. I tried to speak of what happened, but words failed me. People looked at me with pity or fear, dismissing my story as trauma-induced delusion. I retreated, desperate for understanding. I found anonymous corners of the internet. My fingers trembled over the keyboard as I typed out the impossible tale. I wrote about the bear, the house, the bone entity, and the burning cold mark. I pushed my story into the internet, hoping for recognition. For a time, I felt a strange release. Others responded. Some showed skepticism. Some shared their own accounts of impossible encounters. But the entity remained. The mark on my arm grew warmer, sometimes burning. I felt a cold breath on my neck in empty rooms. My online messages started to change. Replies came from unknown sources, fragmented words forming unsettling patterns. My screen would flicker, showing brief, distorted images of bone. I knew it watched. It had never released me. It had only expanded its presence. The torment intensified. My mind grew weary from the constant pressure, the pervasive cold. I could not escape its presence. Every waking moment was a struggle against the invisible hunter. I started to see the mark on other things, on tree bark, on city walls, twisting reality. The fear grew too much to bear. One night, I wrote my final message, a desperate plea for anyone reading to understand. I described the mark, the lingering chill, the endless pursuit. Then I made my choice, seeking an end to the unbearable cycle. My story remained online, a digital record of my suffering. My last post, detailing the entity's lingering hold, gained traction. Others started to talk about the strange symbols appearing around their cities. People shared images, their phones capturing fleeting glimpses of skeletal figures in the periphery. A few even claimed to feel the burning cold mark on their own skin, though no physical trace existed. The horror had not died with me. My desperate plea had instead given the entity a new opportunity. The entity had found new individuals to observe, new people to influence. The mark, a silent, chilling inheritance, continued to spread its inexplicable truth, leaving a persistent, unresolved mystery in its wake. Evenings always offered me a chance to unwind, and I would settle onto the couch with a book, appreciating the quiet of my apartment. That peaceful routine broke about 2 weeks ago when a new sound began coming through the shared wall from the next-door apartment. It was a baby crying, a thin, reedy wail that filled my living space. I understood then someone had finally rented out Unit 3B, and I immediately assumed a new family with a newborn baby had moved in, just getting settled into their new surroundings. The cries started nightly, becoming a regular intrusion upon my once peaceful hours. They were always present, sometimes beginning around 9, other times much later, but their recurring nature became a certainty I could predict. I started bracing myself for them, almost anticipating the coming disruption each night. The sound grew more irritating with each passing night, transforming into a persistent reminder of my now disrupted evenings. I tried to ignore it, turning up music or burying my head under pillows, but the noise persisted. It settled into a peculiar rhythm, an annoying presence that now defined my nights, making the irritation a familiar part of my existence. My belief solidified that it was simply the new tenants and their baby next door, a mundane, if bothersome reality. One evening, the baby's cries did not start. I noticed the unusual quiet as the clock passed 9, then 10, then 11. The apartment next door remained completely silent, and I waited for the familiar wails to begin, but they never did. The quiet continued through the entire night, an unexpected absence where the recurring irritation had always been. I found myself listening for the cries even though I dreaded them. I thought perhaps the new family was simply having a quiet night, or the baby was finally sleeping through, creating a quietness I had not expected. The next night, the quiet also continued. Just as I was about to turn out my light, a soft, unexpected knock came from the shared wall. It was a series of light taps, gentle but distinct. I froze, listening intently. A muffled voice spoke through the plaster from the other side. The words were low and hushed, but they were clear enough. "Please," the voice asked, "can you help me find my baby?" My previous assumption of new neighbors with a baby was instantly gone. The long irritation I had felt for weeks immediately gave way to a pressing, personal mystery. The knock and the desperate plea had shaken me, pulling me out of my apartment and down the short hallway toward Unit 3B. My hand hesitated before reaching for the doorknob, a strange chill running through my fingers. I took a deep breath and twisted the cold brass. The door was unlocked, and it swung inward without resistance, revealing a cavernous darkness beyond. I reached inside, flicking the light switch on the wall just inside the entrance. The sudden illumination revealed a stark, vacant living room. My eyes swept across the bare floor and the unadorned walls. There was no furniture, no sofa, no table, no personal belongings anywhere within the expansive space. The room was completely devoid of any sign of habitation. No boxes, no decorative items. Nothing suggested that anyone had recently lived there. The floorboards were clean, showing no wear from furniture placement, and the walls were freshly painted in a neutral off-white, free of scuff marks or hanging pictures. I stepped further into the apartment, my gaze searching for any evidence of the family I had imagined. The kitchen, visible through an open doorway, was barren, its counters clear and its cabinets shut tight. I walked into what must have been the bedroom, finding only another empty room, its window facing the outside world, reflecting the streetlights. There was no crib, no baby clothes, no toys, no lingering scent of a new infant, nothing indicating a baby had ever existed here. The air felt still and cold, not the warmth of a lived-in space. The silence was absolute, and the mystery deepened into something impossible. Everything I had believed for weeks was wrong, completely and undeniably false. This left me disoriented and filled with fear. I called the landlord, his voice gruff on the phone as he answered my questions about Unit 3B. He confirmed the apartment had been vacant for a year, not rented, not lived in, no tenants ever moving inside that space. His words extinguished any lingering doubt about the impossibility of it all. The baby cries, the knock, the voice, the empty apartment, all of it spiraled into an unthinkable reality that tightened its grip around me. My mind tried to reject the truth, but the landlord's clear statements left no room for normal explanations, leaving a cold dread to fill my chest. I made my way back to my apartment, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. The absolute emptiness of 3B echoed in my thoughts, making my own apartment feel suddenly exposed, as if the shared wall offered no real protection anymore. I entered my living room, my gaze going directly to the shared wall where the sounds and the knock had always originated. There, scratched deeply into the plaster, were two stark words that had not been present moments before. The message read, "Help me." A shiver raced down my spine, tracing an icy path along my back. Before I could move, a cold, insidious whisper formed directly beside my ear, close enough for me to feel the subtle movement of air. "Help me," it pleaded, its sound too intimate, too real, placing the source of the impossible terror right next to my head. My eyes opened, and I looked at the plain white ceiling of the hospital room. I lay alone in the bed, the clean sheet pulled up to my chest. A wide glass wall separated my space from a sitting area beyond it. My family occupied the other side, moving within their separate zone. My mother sat on a green armchair, speaking to my father, who leaned against a table. My sister stood near a window looking out at the city landscape. They talked and laughed together, their faces alight with conversation, their voices completely lost to me behind the thick, soundproof barrier. I watched their expressions shift, their mouths moving in silent patterns. My mother gestured with her hand, then smiled broadly at something my father said. He nodded slowly, a comforting gesture. My sister turned from the window and joined their quiet discussion, her posture relaxed. Their actions showed a familiar rhythm, a normal interaction unfolding just out of my reach. They seemed entirely unaware of my awakening, or perhaps they simply did not perceive the difference in my situation from theirs. A peculiar sensation began deep in my throat. It felt like a small tightness, a quiet gathering of pressure that had not been there moments before. It was not painful yet, merely present, a new awareness within my body. The feeling deepened slightly, a subtle, constricting presence. I swallowed, checking its nature. The action did not remove the developing tension, it only confirmed its existence. My family continued their talk, their joyful, unheard sounds, a stark contrast to the quiet, growing pressure that now steadily settled within me. The peculiar sensation in my throat suddenly tightened, a sharp, unyielding grip that stole the ease from my breath. It was no longer a quiet pressure. It was a physical force, constricting, unyielding. I tried to swallow, a natural, unconscious act that now became a conscious, desperate attempt to push past the new barrier. My muscles strained, a deep burning pain flared, and nothing moved. My throat remained clamped shut, utterly unresponsive to my will. A wave of alarm, cold and sharp, washed over me. My hands, resting on the clean white sheet, began to tremble. It was a subtle vibration at first, a quick, uncontrollable tremor that ran through my fingers, then spread to my wrists. I needed to reach out, to press a call button, to tap on the glass wall, to do something that would break through to my family. I focused my will, willing my arm to lift. My muscles felt heavy, weighted down, completely unresponsive to the command. I strained, pushing against the unseen resistance, but my arm remained fixed, pinned to my side. Panic surged through me, a silent, burning terror that eclipsed everything else. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped percussion that reverberated through my entire body. My breath hitched, each inhale shallow and insufficient, failing to fill my lungs with the air I needed. A crushing sense of helplessness settled upon me, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest, amplifying the struggle to breathe. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick and heavy, stuck to the roof of my mouth. My gaze snapped back to my family beyond the glass. My mother laughed, her head tilted back slightly, her expression pure joy. My father nodded, a slow, serene movement, his eyes crinkling at the corners. My sister pointed towards something outside the window, her posture relaxed, a bright smile on her face. They were talking, interacting, moving with an ease that seemed impossibly distant from my unfolding nightmare. Their faces, alight with conversation, betrayed no hint of the silent struggle consuming me. They remained unaware, oblivious to the swift, devastating collapse occurring within my body. The pain in my throat intensified, twisting into a relentless vice that squeezed tighter and tighter with each passing moment. Each attempt to swallow was agony, a burning effort that only magnified the blocked sensation. The trembling spread from my hands throughout my entire body, a shaking that I could not stop, a visible manifestation of the silent scream rising within me. My muscles cramped, a clenching tension that offered no relief, leaving me rigid. I was trapped, paralyzed, not by any external force, but by the betrayal of my own physical form. The burning terror in my chest grew, a searing fire that consumed my thoughts. My vision started to narrow, the edges blurring into a soft tunnel, but my family's laughing faces remained clear, defined in the center of my sight. They continued to talk of their day, of plans, while my present was dissolving into a growing horror. I fought against the total immobility, struggling to make a sound, to create any sign that would alert them. My fingers curled into weak, useless fists against the sheet, incapable of grasping or signaling. The air felt thin, not reaching deep enough into my lungs, despite my shallow gasps. My chest burned with the effort, my entire body screaming for oxygen that refused to descend. The world outside my glass wall remained bright and oblivious, a sharp contrast to the growing panic that now enveloped me. My family continued their conversation, their smiles unwavering, their laughter unheard, creating a sharp dissonance. I felt alone, consumed by an accelerating internal collapse that they could not see or feel. The silent agony was mine alone, a heavy burden that grew suffocating with each moment. A horrifying spasm clenched my throat, forcing a violent, uncontrolled gag. My body heaved, desperate for air, but the passage remained cruelly sealed. Each gasp was useless, a tearing struggle that pulled no oxygen into my lungs, only intensifying the burning starvation within my chest. I opened my mouth, a silent, desperate cry building behind the locked muscles, an internal scream that produced only a terrifying pressure that pushed outwards without sound. My eyes watered from the strain, fixated on the family beyond the glass. My vision began to blur, the edges of the room fading into a soft, indistinct haze, but my family's faces remained piercingly clear in the narrowing tunnel of my sight. My mother threw her head back, her laughter completely unheard, her mouth open in a wide, joyful shape. My father reached out and playfully tapped my sister's arm, his smile warm and easy. They were alive and vibrant, completely absorbed in their shared moment, utterly divorced from the silent, suffocating horror engulfing me. The desperate pleas for help that clawed at the back of my mind, formless and wordless, dissolved into the overwhelming physical struggle. My throat spasmed again, a final, convulsive effort to expel the obstruction that was not there. The muscles gave way, not opening but collapsing further, a sudden, horrifying choke that tore through my awareness. My eyes widened, seeing the bright, oblivious world of my family one last time. My mother's smile was the last clear thing I registered, a beacon of normalcy in my rapidly darkening perception. The pressure within my skull became immense, everything turning a blinding white, then instantly, profoundly, black. The aisle stretched too long before me, its perfect length creating an unnatural tunnel. I walked slowly, my dress rustling around my ankles, and observed the faces in the pews. They wore smiles, fixed and wide, but their eyes held no warmth. The applause began then, a sparse scattering of sound that evaporated into the large room, leaving a quiet void. Victor stood waiting, his posture straight, a bright grin on his face. His eyes, though, held a flat expression, a deep disconnect from the joy his mouth projected. He reached for my hand, his grip firm, a practiced gesture. Everything felt rehearsed, like a scene performed many times before, each movement precise. The entire moment was beautiful, yet it lacked a true beat. This flawless picture seemed to cover something else, an unnervingly artificial event from its very start. The reception hall sparkled with lights and music. I moved through the room, Victor's hand a constant presence on my lower back. I tried to engage with guests, catching snippets of conversation. A woman spoke of her trip to Italy, then immediately discussed the weather forecast. Her words held no connection. Another guest described a childhood memory, abruptly shifting to a detailed explanation of their current job. The topics changed too fast, and the words did not connect. People spoke at each other, not with each other. I found Clara, my maid of honor, near the cake table. Her usual vibrant complexion was gone. Her skin was pale, her eyes darted around the room, fixed on no object. She held her bouquet too tightly, crushing the delicate petals. I asked her if she felt well. Her response was a single, mumbled word I could not understand, and then she turned away. "Is something wrong?" I whispered to Victor, my unease growing. His head snapped toward me, his smile fixed. "No, darling, everything is perfect. The best day." His words came too fast, a practiced reassurance, delivered before I had even finished my question. His hand tightened on my back, urging me forward. I felt a shift in the crowd. A group of guests stood by the window, then a moment later they were closer to the band. They simply occupied new spaces. My head turned quickly to follow the movement, but it stopped as soon as I looked directly. The arrangement of bodies changed, just at the edge of my vision. It happened again, a quiet reordering of people. They stood in different spots, though I never saw them move. My gaze drifted toward the head table. Fewer guests now sat there. A chair, still neatly tucked beneath, stood empty. I tried to recall who had occupied that spot, tried to remember them leaving, but the memory was simply not there. My eyes swept across the room. Another table, closer to the band, now held 2 empty places. I could not picture those guests walking away. The chairs stood vacant, their purpose unfulfilled. An unnerving, sweet scent began to spread through the hall. It grew stronger, a thick presence in the air. It coated my tongue. I saw a groomsman standing by the far wall. He stood still, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular across the room. His eyes held a vacant look. He wore a crisp charcoal suit. I watched him for a moment, my attention drawn to his stillness among the moving crowd. The music played on around him, yet he remained motionless. Then, in the span of a single breath, he was gone. My eyes registered the empty space where he had stood. His jacket hung on the back of a nearby chair, its fabric still holding the shape of shoulders. The stark absence made my breath catch in my throat. A cold dread solidified within me. This was not a subtle shift in the crowd. This was a disturbing vanishing. The music continued its endless, perfect rotation of notes. Victor's hand tightened on my waist, pulling me close. We moved together across the polished floor. My gaze swept past the rapidly emptying tables, deliberately avoiding a tally of the spaces where no one stood. Each time my vision threatened to fix on a vacant spot, I shifted my focus to the patterns of the lights on the ceiling, to the steady movement of our feet. Victor leaned his mouth close to my ear. "Everything is perfect, Lilith," he whispered, his voice steady. "This is our day. Nothing is wrong." His words provided a clear directive in the increasing emptiness. I felt his breath warm against my skin. I looked into his eyes. A desperate understanding passed between us, a silent agreement without spoken words. His gaze met mine, confirming the unspoken choice. We moved, not acknowledging the increasing absences around us. We simply kept dancing. Our steps continued in perfect time, ignoring the horrific reality that pressed in on all sides. We were a single unit, moving in a hall that emptied steadily, choosing to believe the world remained as it should be.